Dean Ambrose sends a message to Paul Heyman after Vision betrays Seth Rollins. This is absolutely insane and I can't believe what I just witnessed. Dean Ambrose just posted a cryptic video message directed at Paul Heyman in the wake of the Vision's brutal betrayal of Seth Rollins, and what he said is going to send shockwaves through the entire wrestling world. After years of being Jon Moxley in AEW, after building a completely different career away from WWE, after everyone thought the Dean Ambrose character was dead and buried, he just resurrected it to send the most personal and threatening message to Paul Heyman that we've seen in wrestling in years. This isn't just about Seth getting betrayed by his faction, this isn't just about old Shield nostalgia, this is Dean Ambrose declaring war on everyone who ever manipulated, used, or betrayed his brothers, and Paul Heyman is at the top of that list. I'm furious that WWE hasn't responded yet, I'm shocked that Heyman hasn't fired back, and I'm about to break down every single word of Dean's message and explain why this could either be the greatest worked shoot in modern wrestling or the beginning of a real-life feud that's going to tear the wrestling business apart. If you think you know what's happening right now, you're wrong, because this situation is so much deeper and more complicated than anyone realizes. Let me set the stage for why Dean Ambrose sending a message to Paul Heyman right now is so significant and so loaded with history and implications. Seth Rollins just had his life's work destroyed. The Vision, the faction he built from scratch, the group that was supposed to be his legacy, imploded when key members turned on him in the most vicious beatdown we've seen on Raw in years. Seth was left broken and humiliated in the middle of the ring while his so-called brothers walked away laughing. Now, where's Roman Reigns during all this? The tribal chief is on SmackDown dealing with his own bloodline drama, and standing right behind him, whispering in his ear, manipulating every decision, is Paul Heyman. The same Paul Heyman who was with Seth during his authority days. The same Paul Heyman who's made a career out of attaching himself to the most powerful wrestlers and using them for his own benefit. The same Paul Heyman who represents everything that's corrupt and political about the wrestling business. So when Dean Ambrose, and yes, he specifically used the name Dean Ambrose, not Jon Moxley, posts a video where he's sitting in what looks like an abandoned warehouse, wearing his old Shield tactical vest, looking directly into the camera with those crazy eyes we remember from his WWE days, and starts talking about Paul Heyman, the entire wrestling world stops. Let me read you some of what Dean said, because every word is dripping with venom and history. Paul, you've been awfully quiet lately. Seth's world is burning down, and you're standing next to Roman acting like you don't remember how you manipulated all of us back in the day. You think I forgot? You think I don't remember every backstage conversation, every piece of advice that was actually poison designed to turn us against each other? Dean paused, letting that sink in, and then continued, Seth doesn't need the Vision. Seth doesn't need a faction of guys who are gonna stab him in the back the first time someone waves money in their face. What Seth needs is his real brothers. The guys who bled with him. The guys who built an empire with him. The guys who would never betray him no matter what. And then, and this is the part that made my jaw drop, Dean looked directly into the camera and said, I'm coming. And when I get there, Paul, you and I are gonna have a long overdue conversation about loyalty, about family, and about what happens to snakes who think they can manipulate the Shield and get away with it. Let me ask you right now in the comments, is Dean Ambrose actually coming to WWE, or is this the most elaborate work to generate buzz that we've ever seen? Because I genuinely cannot tell, and I need to know what the wrestling newsletter family thinks. Now let's break down the layers of what Dean's message actually means, because this isn't just a simple "I'm gonna beat you up" promo. This is Dean Ambrose, who hasn't existed as a character in 5 years, specifically targeting Paul Heyman at a moment when Seth Rollins is at his most vulnerable. That's calculated. That's strategic. That's someone who understands wrestling psychology and how to create maximum impact with minimum words. First, let's address the Paul Heyman connection. Paul has a long history with all 3 Shield members, but his relationship with Dean was always the most contentious. Dean never trusted Paul. He saw through Paul's manipulations in a way that Seth and Roman didn't always recognize. Dean was the one who would call out Paul's BS in interviews and promos, who would refuse to play along with Paul's games. So for Dean to specifically target Paul now after the Vision betrays Seth is Dean saying, I warned you about people like Paul Heyman. I warned you that surrounding yourself with opportunists and politicians would end in betrayal. But you didn't listen, and now you're paying the price. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Paul Heyman is currently aligned with Roman Reigns. So if Dean comes after Paul, he's essentially declaring war on the bloodline as well. Is that Dean's intention? Is he planning to fight both the bloodline and whoever betrayed Seth and the Vision? Is Dean Ambrose positioning himself as the lone wolf who's going to clean up the entire wrestling business by taking out all the corrupt elements one by one? That would be incredible storytelling if WWE has the guts to actually book it that way. Dean Ambrose is the chaotic vigilante who answers to no one, who has no corporate allegiances, who's willing to attack anyone he perceives as a threat to his Shield brothers. That's money. That's a character that could carry WWE for years if they don't screw it up. Trivia time for the wrestling newsletter family. When Dean Ambrose left WWE in 2019, what was the last major storyline he was involved in before his departure? Let's see who remembers his final WWE run. Here's what's driving me crazy about this situation: we don't know if this is sanctioned by WWE or if Dean is just doing this independently because he genuinely cares about Seth and wants to send a message. Think about it. Dean Ambrose posting a video on social media doesn't necessarily mean he's signed a WWE contract. It doesn't mean he's been cleared by creative or approved by management. It could just be Jon Moxley, the real person, using his old character name to make a statement about his real-life friend being betrayed on television. But if that's the case, if this is not approved by WWE, then we're looking at one of the most audacious moves in wrestling history. We're looking at a top AEW star using his former WWE character, which WWE technically owns the trademark to insert himself into WWE programming without permission. That could lead to legal issues, cease and desist letters, contract disputes, and all kinds of messy business that would make this situation even more dramatic. On the other hand, if this is approved by WWE, if Dean Ambrose returning is part of a larger storyline that involves Seth's vision betrayal and Paul Heyman's manipulation of Roman, then we're looking at genius long-term booking that's been in the works for months. That would mean WWE has been planning this Shield reunion angle for a long time, and the Vision's betrayal was specifically designed to trigger Dean's return. Both scenarios are fascinating. Both scenarios create incredible storytelling opportunities. But we won't know which one is real until WWE or AEW makes an official statement, and right now both companies are being suspiciously quiet about Dean's message. Drop a comment telling me which scenario you think is more likely. Is this a WWE approved return, or is Dean going rogue? I'm genuinely split on this, and I want to hear your theories. Let's talk about the symbolism of Dean wearing his old Shield tactical vest in the video, because that detail is not accidental. Dean could have filmed this message in regular clothes, looking like Jon Moxley, keeping his AEW persona intact. But he chose to resurrect the Dean Ambrose look, to put on that Shield vest, to visually connect this message to the Shield's legacy. That vest represents brotherhood. It represents loyalty. It represents a time when Seth, Roman, and Dean conquered WWE together as an unstoppable unit. By wearing it in this video, Dean is reminding everyone, especially Seth, that no matter how much time has passed, no matter how much their careers have diverged, no matter how many new factions or alliances they formed, the Shield bond is forever. But it's also a message to Paul Heyman and everyone else who's ever tried to manipulate or destroy that bond. Dean is saying, you can try to break us apart, you can create new factions and new power structures, but at the end of the day, the Shield is stronger than any of your political games. We were brothers before WWE tried to make us enemies, and we'll be brothers long after all of your schemes fall apart. That's powerful messaging. That's the kind of emotional storytelling that makes wrestling mean something beyond just scripted entertainment. That's what separates good wrestling from great wrestling, when the performers tap into real emotions and real history to create moments that feel authentic even within the predetermined nature of the business. Now here's my controversial take that's going to make some of you angry. Dean Ambrose sending this message might actually be bad for Seth Rollins' character development. Stay with me on this. Seth just had his faction betray him. He's at his lowest point. This is the perfect opportunity for Seth to have to rebuild himself, to prove that he doesn't need a faction, to show that he can be a main event star through his own talent and determination without relying on groups or allies. But if Dean Ambrose immediately shows up to save Seth, if the Shield reunion happens right away as a response to the Vision's betrayal, then Seth doesn't have to face the consequences of his failure. He doesn't have to do the hard character work of redeeming himself. He just gets rescued by his old partner and everything's fine again. That's lazy storytelling. That's taking the easy way out instead of doing the difficult emotional work that makes wrestling compelling. Seth should have to struggle alone for a while. He should have to question his decisions and confront his failures. He should have to earn his way back to the top instead of getting an instant Shield reunion that fixes everything. So while Dean's message is exciting and nostalgic and creates short-term buzz, I'm worried that it's going to rob Seth of a meaningful character arc that could have made him an even bigger star. Let me know in the comments, do you want to see Dean rescue Seth immediately, or should Seth have to struggle alone for a while before the Shield reunites? What makes for better storytelling? Let's discuss Paul Heyman's potential response to Dean's message, because the advocate never stays silent when someone calls him out. Paul is a master of the microphone, one of the greatest talkers in wrestling history, and he's not going to let Dean Ambrose threaten him without firing back with a verbal assault of his own. I predict Paul is going to cut a promo on SmackDown where he dismisses Dean's message as the desperate attention-seeking of a washed-up wrestler who couldn't make it in WWE and had to run to AEW to find relevance. Paul will say that Dean Ambrose died when he left WWE, that Jon Moxley is a completely different person, and that whoever posted that video has no right to use a name that belongs to WWE. Paul will probably bring up Roman Reigns as proof that loyalty to him pays off. He'll point to Roman's historic title reign, his position as the face of WWE, his universal respect as the tribal chief, and he'll say that's what happens when you trust Paul Heyman. That's what happens when you let me guide your career. But Dean Ambrose was always too stubborn, too stupid, too arrogant to accept help, and look where it got him, begging for relevance by making threats he can't possibly follow through on. That would be classic Paul Heyman. Condescending, dismissive, cutting right to the heart of the issue while also protecting his own interests and positioning. It would also set up an incredible confrontation when Dean actually shows up and can respond to Paul face to face. But here's the wild card: what if Paul Heyman agrees with Dean? What if Paul cuts a promo where he says, "You're absolutely right, Dean. I did manipulate you all back in the day. I did play political games. I did put my own interests ahead of yours. But that's the wrestling business. That's how you survive in this industry. And if you're finally smart enough to understand that, then maybe just maybe you're finally ready to work with me instead of against me." That would be a swerve nobody sees coming. Paul recruiting Dean Ambrose to join the bloodline? Dean and Roman working together under Paul's guidance with Seth as the outsider? That flips the entire Shield dynamic and creates completely new storyline possibilities that we've never seen before. Quick question for the comments: if Paul Heyman offered Dean Ambrose a spot in the bloodline, should Dean accept or refuse? What would make the most sense for the story? Now let's address the elephant in the room: how does AEW feel about all of this? Jon Moxley is one of their top stars, one of their most valuable assets, someone they've built major storylines around for 5 years. And now he's using his old WWE character name to insert himself into WWE storylines? That's got to make Tony Khan and AEW management extremely uncomfortable. There are a few possibilities here. Option 1, this is part of a working relationship between WWE and AEW where they're allowing talent to cross over for special appearances. We've seen hints of this with the Forbidden Door concept, and maybe this is the next evolution where top stars can appear in both companies for the right storylines. Option 2, Jon Moxley's AEW contract is actually expiring soon and this is his way of generating buzz before his free agency. Maybe Moxley is playing WWE and AEW against each other to get the best possible deal, and this Dean Ambrose video is part of his negotiating strategy. Option 3, Moxley is leaving AEW and returning to WWE full-time, and this video is the beginning of his reintegration into WWE programming. Maybe he's been in secret negotiations with Triple H for months and this is the official start of his homecoming. Option 4, this is completely unauthorized by both companies, and Moxley is going rogue because he genuinely wants to support Seth Rollins regardless of corporate politics or contract restrictions. That would be incredibly risky legally, but it would also be the most punk rock thing any major wrestler has done in years. All 4 options have different implications for wrestling as a whole. All 4 options would create different storyline possibilities. And right now, we have no idea which one is correct because everyone involved is staying silent. Here's my prediction and I want you to tell me if I'm crazy in the comments. I think Dean Ambrose is coming to WWE, but not as a full-time wrestler. I think he's going to appear for a limited run, maybe 3 to 6 months, to help Seth deal with the Vision's betrayal and settle his score with Paul Heyman. Then he'll return to AEW as Jon Moxley and continue his career there. This would be a win for everyone. WWE gets a huge nostalgia pop and a Shield reunion storyline that will draw massive interest. AEW maintains their relationship with Moxley long-term and gets publicity from all the WWE buzz. And Moxley himself gets to play both characters, make incredible money from both companies, and have dream matches in both promotions. It's the kind of innovative business arrangement that could change the wrestling industry if it actually happens. But it requires WWE and AEW to work together instead of treating each other as bitter enemies, and I'm not sure either company is mature enough to make that happen. Let me ask you, do you think WWE and AEW should work together more, or should they stay completely separate? What's better for the wrestling business overall? Let's talk about the actual content of Dean's message and the specific language he used, because every word choice matters when you're a professional communicator like Dean Ambrose. He didn't say Jon Moxley has a message. He didn't say the former Dean Ambrose wants to address Paul Heyman. He specifically said, "I'm Dean Ambrose," and spoke in first person as that character. That's reclaiming an identity. That's Dean saying, "You don't own me just because you own the trademark to my name. I am Dean Ambrose regardless of what company I work for or what name appears on my contract. This character, this persona, this person, it's me, and nobody can take it away." That's incredibly powerful from a creative and personal standpoint. It's a wrestler asserting ownership over his own identity in an industry that's always trying to control and commodify performers. It's Dean Ambrose saying, "I'm not a corporate asset, I'm a human being with my own voice and my own agency." WWE could try to shut this down with legal threats. They could send Dean a cease and desist letter demanding he stop using the Dean Ambrose name. They could try to enforce their trademark and intellectual property rights. But the optics of that would be terrible. WWE suing a wrestler for using his own name to defend his real-life friend? That makes WWE look like the corporate villain and makes Dean look like the rebel hero. So WWE is stuck in a position where they almost have to play along with this, whether they originally approved it or not. They have to incorporate Dean's message into their storylines because ignoring it would make them look weak and out of touch with what fans care about. That's genius maneuvering by Dean if this was truly unauthorized. He put WWE in checkmate where they have no choice but to work with him or look like the bad guys for trying to stop him. Here's a behind-the-scenes question for the comments. Do you think WWE's legal department is freaking out about Dean using the Dean Ambrose name, or do you think this was all planned with their approval? I'm fascinated by the legal implications of this situation. Now let's discuss what this means for the bloodline and Roman Reigns specifically. Paul Heyman is the tribal chief's wise man, his most trusted advisor, the architect of his historic championship reign. If Dean Ambrose is coming after Paul Heyman, that means Roman has to decide, does he protect Paul, or does he side with his Shield brother? This is the exact kind of moral dilemma that creates compelling wrestling storytelling. Roman has spent years building the bloodline, establishing himself as the head of the table, creating a family-based power structure that's dominated WWE. But Dean Ambrose represents Roman's past, the brotherhood that existed before the bloodline, the bonds that were forged before Roman became the tribal chief. Can Roman betray Paul Heyman, the man who's helped him reach unprecedented heights, just because his old Shield brother is demanding it? That seems impossible. But can Roman betray Dean Ambrose, one of the brothers who helped him become a star in the first place, just to protect Paul Heyman? That seems equally impossible. This is a no-win situation for Roman's character, and that's what makes it brilliant. Whatever choice Roman makes will have massive consequences. If he sides with Paul over Dean, the Shield Brotherhood is truly dead and we see Roman fully embracing his tribal chief persona with no connection to his past. If he sides with Dean over Paul, the bloodline's power structure collapses and Roman has to rebuild everything from scratch. WWE could drag this decision out for months, with Roman constantly caught between these two worlds, trying to find a way to have both the bloodline and his Shield brothers, eventually realizing that he has to choose one or the other. That's storytelling. That's character development. That's the kind of long-term arc that makes wrestling feel important instead of just being a series of random matches with no emotional stakes. Comment below telling me what you think Roman should do: side with Paul Heyman and the bloodline, or side with Dean Ambrose and the Shield? There's no wrong answer, I just want to see where everyone stands. Let's address something that's been bothering me about the whole Vision betrayal that triggered Dean's message. Why did the Vision members betray Seth in the first place? What was their motivation? Were they jealous of Seth's position? Were they offered money by someone? Were they manipulated by an outside force? WWE hasn't clearly explained this yet, and that's a problem. Betrayals only work when the audience understands why they happened. Without clear motivation, it just looks like random violence designed to shock viewers without any deeper meaning. Dean's message to Paul Heyman suggests a possible explanation. What if Paul Heyman was secretly behind the Vision's betrayal? What if Paul manipulated the Vision members into turning on Seth as a way of eliminating a potential threat to Roman's position at the top of WWE? What if this whole thing is Paul playing 4D chess, removing obstacles to the bloodline's dominance while making it look like he had nothing to do with it? That would be classic Paul Heyman. That's exactly the kind of long-term manipulation that the Advocate is famous for. And it would explain why Dean is so specifically targeting Paul in his message, because Dean figured out that Paul was behind the betrayal even if nobody else has realized it yet. If WWE goes in this direction, if they reveal that Paul Heyman orchestrated the Vision's betrayal as part of a larger scheme to control WWE's main event scene, that's incredible storytelling that ties multiple storylines together and makes everything feel connected and purposeful instead of random. But WWE has to actually commit to that story and reveal it properly. They can't just hint at it and then abandon the idea when they get distracted by something else. Follow-through is everything in wrestling, and WWE's track record on follow-through is not great. Here's my final analysis of what Dean Ambrose's message to Paul Heyman means for professional wrestling, and then I want to hear your complete thoughts. This message represents a shift in how wrestlers view their relationships with companies and characters. Dean is refusing to let WWE's ownership of the Dean Ambrose trademark prevent him from using that identity when it matters to him personally. This is wrestlers reclaiming power in an industry that's always tried to control them. This is performers saying, we are more than just your intellectual property, we're human beings with real relationships and real emotions that transcend corporate branding. This is the next evolution of wrestler empowerment that we've been seeing build for years. Whether Dean is coming to WWE for real, whether this leads to a Shield reunion, whether Paul Heyman responds, all of that matters for the story. But what matters more is what this represents for the business. Wrestlers having more control. Companies having to work with their talent instead of against them. The artificial barriers between promotions breaking down so that the best stories can be told regardless of which company's logo is in the corner of the screen. If this is the future of wrestling, if this is the new normal where wrestlers can cross between companies, use their characters however they want, and tell stories that matter to them personally, then we're entering a golden age of professional wrestling that could rival any era that came before it. But if this is just a one-time stunt, if WWE shuts it down with legal threats, if AEW gets upset and prevents Moxley from ever working with WWE again, then we'll look back on this as a missed opportunity, a glimpse of what could have been if everyone involved had been brave enough to embrace change instead of clinging to outdated business models. The wrestling world is watching. The fans are waiting. And Dean Ambrose just fired the first shot in what could be the most important storyline in modern wrestling history. If you made it through this entire video, you are amazing, and I need you to do me 3 huge favors right now. First, smash the like button if you think Dean Ambrose's message to Paul Heyman is the most exciting development in wrestling this year and you want to see where this goes. Second, drop a detailed comment telling me your theory about what's really happening here. Is Dean coming to WWE? Is this a work? Is it a shoot? Is it something in between? I want to hear every theory, no matter how wild. And third, subscribe to Wrestling Newsletter and hit that notification bell because this story is evolving by the hour, and I'm going to be covering every single development, every response, every twist in this saga as it unfolds. This could be the beginning of something that changes wrestling forever, or it could flame out in a week, but either way, we're going to cover it together as a community, and you don't want to miss a second of it.